What if you could witness every single day of America's bloodiest conflict, from April 12, 1861, when the first shots rang out at Fort Sumter, to April 9, 1865, when Lee surrendered at Appomattox? 4 years that tore a nation apart. Over 600,000 souls lost. Brothers fighting brothers. This is the American Civil War, from secession to surrender. An unprecedented journey through 1,460 days that forged modern America. Each episode dives deep into specific days, uncovering stories that have never been told this way. From the politicians in Washington to the soldiers in the trenches, from the enslaved seeking freedom to the families left behind. You think you know the Civil War? You're about to discover you barely scratched the surface. The most comprehensive Civil War series ever created starts now. In 1820, the United States faced a crisis. Missouri wanted to join the Union as a slave state, threatening the balance between free and slave states. With 11 free and 11 slave states, adding Missouri would tip the scales in favor of the South. To resolve this, Congress passed the Missouri Compromise. Missouri entered as a slave state, Maine as a free state, keeping the balance at 12 each. The compromise also drew a line at 3630 across the Louisiana Territory. Slavery was banned north of it, but allowed south. Northerners accepted the deal reluctantly, uneasy about the expansion of slavery and the idea that a line could decide freedom. Southerners saw it as a partial victory. Missouri was theirs, but the restriction north of the line angered them. Both sides felt they had sacrificed something important. The compromise was a temporary fix, not a solution. It exposed deep divisions and set the stage for future conflict. The debate over slavery's expansion was far from over. The Missouri Compromise delayed the inevitable, but the nation's foundation was already cracking. The uneasy peace would not last. The question of slavery's future would return, fiercer than before. The seeds of civil war had been planted. For over 30 years, the Missouri Compromise line kept the peace until 1854. Senator Stephen A. Douglas proposed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, creating 2 new territories north of the old line. Instead of Congress deciding on slavery, Douglas introduced popular sovereignty, letting settlers vote on the issue. This erased the Missouri Compromise line and opened new lands to possible slavery. The North erupted in outrage, feeling betrayed by the repeal of a sacred pact. Abolitionists and moderates alike feared the spread of slavery and the loss of free soil for white laborers. The Republican Party was born, dedicated to stopping slavery's expansion. In the South, the act was celebrated as a victory for states' rights and Southern honor. Southerners believed they could now expand slavery westward. Both sides dug in, convinced their way of life was under threat. The Kansas-Nebraska Act shattered old compromises and unleashed new tensions. The fragile peace was gone. The nation was now on a collision course. The question of slavery would be decided not by debate, but by conflict. The countdown to war had begun. The Kansas-Nebraska Act turned Kansas into a battleground. Pro-slavery border ruffians from Missouri and anti-slavery free soilers from the north flooded the territory. Both sides aimed to control Kansas's future through the Ballotine by force. Illegal voting and rival governments plunged Kansas into chaos. Violence erupted, pro-slavery forces attacked Lawrence, anti-slavery settlers struck back. John Brown, a radical abolitionist, led a brutal raid at Pottawatomie Creek, killing 5 pro-slavery men. The territory descended into open warfare, bleeding Kansas. Newspapers across the country reported the bloodshed, shocking the nation. In the North, the violence confirmed fears of a slave power conspiracy. In the South, John Brown was seen as a terrorist, and Northerners as dangerous fanatics. Kansas became a symbol of the nation's deepening divide. The conflict there previewed the larger war to come. Political compromise had failed. The struggle over slavery was now a fight to the death. The nation watched, horrified, as Kansas bled. In 1854, Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin electrified the nation. The book exposed the cruelty of slavery through the story of Uncle Tom, a kind, devout slave torn from his family. Northerners were moved to outrage and tears. Many joined the abolitionist cause. Southerners denounced the book as slander, insisting it misrepresented their way of life. Uncle Tom's Cabin sold hundreds of thousands of copies, fueling the national debate. It made slavery a personal moral issue for millions. The power of a story helped push the country closer to war. John Brown, infamous from Bleeding, Kansas, set out to ignite a slave rebellion. In October 1859, he and a small band seized the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Brown hoped enslaved people would join him, but none did. Local militia and U.S. Marines, led by Robert E. Lee, quickly crushed the raid. Brown was captured, tried, and hanged for treason. His calm defiance and final words made him a martyr in the North. In the South, the raid sparked panic and outrage, proof they believed that the North wanted to destroy them. Militias drilled, preparing for war. John Brown's raid deepened the nation's divisions. The road to civil war was now unmistakable. The 1860 presidential election shattered the last bonds holding the country together. The Democratic Party split. Northern Democrats backed Stephen Douglas. Southerners chose John Breckinridge. A new constitutional Union Party nominated John Bell, hoping to avoid the slavery issue. The Republicans, led by Abraham Lincoln, opposed the expansion of slavery. Lincoln's name didn't appear on Southern ballots, but he swept the North and won the presidency. The South saw his victory as a direct threat to their way of life. Southern leaders warned that secession was their only option. For the North, it was a triumph for democracy and free soil. For the South, it was a catastrophe. The Union was now on the brink of collapse. Lincoln's election was the breaking point. South Carolina seceded in December 1860, soon followed by 6 more Deep South states. They formed the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as president. Their new constitution protected slavery explicitly. President Buchanan did nothing to stop the breakup. The North was divided. Some wanted peace, others demanded the Union be preserved. Southern states seized federal property, including forts. Major Robert Anderson moved his small garrison to Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, preparing for a siege. The nation was coming apart at the seams. The stage was set for the first shots of war. By April 1861, Fort Sumter was the last Union stronghold in the South. Lincoln sent ships with food, not weapons, hoping to avoid war. The Confederacy saw the fort as an insult and demanded its surrender. Major Anderson refused, though he was nearly out of food. After tense negotiations, Confederate General Beauregard issued a final ultimatum. Anderson stood firm, awaiting the first shot. The Confederates decided to act before Union supplies could arrive. At 3:20 a.m. on April 12, Anderson received a final warning. In 1 hour, the bombardment would begin. The moment of decision had arrived. At 4:30 a.m., April 12, 1861, Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter. The first shots of the Civil War echoed across Charleston Harbor. Major Anderson's outnumbered men held out for 34 hours under relentless bombardment. Fires raged, the flag was shot down and raised again, but the fort was doomed. With supplies gone and the fort in ruins, Anderson surrendered on April 13. No one died in the bombardment, but the war had begun. The Union garrison marched out with honor, their flag held high. Across the nation, crowds cheered or wept. The time for compromise was over. The United States was now two nations at war. The long debate over slavery and union had ended in blood and fire. The Civil War had begun. America would never be the same. April 15th. The nation reels. Fort Sumter has fallen, the flag is down, and President Lincoln responds. He calls for a special session of Congress. Lincoln declares, the Union must be preserved. His words thunder across the country, printed in every newspaper, whispered on every street. 75,000 volunteers are summoned in enormous number, signaling a war, not a mere insurrection. Governors scramble, telegrams fly, quotas are set, and the machinery of war lurches to life. In towns and cities, patriotic fervor surges. Young men rush to enlist, believing they're answering history's call. None can imagine the long, bloody road ahead. But in the South, Lincoln's call is seen as a declaration of war, a threat, an act of coercion. Border states like Virginia and Tennessee are forced to choose. Lincoln's demand for troops is the final push. Southern loyalty snaps. The president's bold move, meant to save the Union, instead accelerates its descent into civil war. The lines are drawn. The time for compromise is over. The world watches as America prepares to fight itself. The president's proclamation echoes, the Union must be preserved. The Civil War is here. April 16th. Amid the rush to war, Lincoln signs the District of Columbia Compensated Emancipation Act. Slavery is abolished in the nation's capital, a beacon of hope in dark times. The act offers compensation to loyal slaveholders and funds for voluntary colonization, reflecting the era's prejudices. For over 3,000 enslaved people in Washington, D.C., the legalities matter less than the reality. They are free. News spreads like wildfire. Families dream of reunion, and freedom becomes tangible. The capital is no longer a marketplace for human flesh. The war for union is now inseparable from the cause of liberty. In the South, this act confirms their worst fears, proof they believe that the federal government will not rest until slavery is destroyed everywhere. As chains are broken in Washington, the nation is bound tighter in the chains of war. On that same day, while Washington celebrates emancipation, Harper's Ferry faces destruction. The Union garrison, hopelessly outnumbered by Virginia militia, receives orders, destroy the arsenal if it cannot be held. Under cover of darkness, powder trails are laid, and at 10 o'clock, the arsenal erupts in flames. The night sky glows as ammunition explodes. The Union soldiers retreat, leaving devastation behind. The arsenal's destruction is both defeat and defiance. Better to burn it than let it arm the enemy. The Confederacy is denied a prize. For now, the fires of Harper's Ferry send a clear message. The Union will not surrender its power easily. The war's brutality is already on display. The arsenal's ruins mark the start of a new, harsher phase. The struggle for control and for survival has begun. The flames are a warning. This war will spare nothing. The nation's wounds are only beginning to burn. April 17th, Virginia secedes. The Old Dominion, cradle of presidents, joins the Confederacy, a blow that shakes the North to its core. The decision is agonizing. Many delegates are torn between Union and state. Lincoln's call for troops is the tipping point. Virginians refuse to fight fellow Southerners. The secession doubles the Confederacy's strength and places Washington, D.C. in peril. The hope for a quick war fades. The reality of a long, bloody conflict sets in. Western Virginia, loyal to the Union, as outrageous seeds of internal conflict are sown. Virginia's departure shatters old bonds and legitimizes the rebellion. The state that birthed the Republic is now its battlefield. The nation is at war with itself. The cost will be unimaginable. In Montgomery, Confederate President Jefferson Davis escalates the conflict. He issues letters of marque, unleashing privateers to attack Union merchant ships. The Atlantic becomes a war zone. Northern commerce is threatened. Insurance rates soar. The U.S. government declares captured privateers will be treated as pirates, not prisoners of war. The rules of conflict are changing. War is now economic, global, and ruthless. The Confederacy gambles on private greed to strike at the Union's lifeblood. The Union Navy faces a daunting task: blockade the South and protect its own ships. The struggle extends beyond armies and forts now. It's fought on the seas. The war's reach is everywhere. No one is safe from its consequences. In Washington, the crisis deepens. The capital is vulnerable. Lincoln needs a leader. All eyes turn to Colonel Robert E. Lee, the Union's finest soldier, a Virginian torn between country and home. Lincoln's offer command of the entire U.S. Army. Lee agonizes. He opposes secession but cannot fight against Virginia. "How can I draw my sword upon my native state?" he asks. After a night of soul-searching, Lee declines the command and resigns his commission. He will not fight for the Confederacy yet. He cannot fight against it. The Union loses its greatest general. The Confederacy gains a hero. One man's choice alters the course of the war. The cost of loyalty is heartbreak. The lines are drawn, even within a single soul. The war's tragedy is now personal. The fires at Harper's Ferry failed to destroy everything. Townspeople saved the rifle works and machinery. Virginia militia seizes what remains. The Confederacy gains a vital industrial prize of machinery that will arm its soldiers. The arsenal's capture is a tangible victory for the South, a blow to the Union. The machinery is shipped south, fueling the Confederate war effort. Harper's Ferry becomes a Confederate outpost, its people divided. The struggle for resources is as fierce as the fight for territory. Factories and railroads will decide this war as much as courage. The Union's loss is the Confederacy's gain. The balance of power shifts, one salvage rifle at a time. The North answers Lincoln's call. The 6th Massachusetts Regiment, ordinary men turned soldiers, marches through New York. The city, once divided, erupts in patriotic unity cheers, flags, flowers. The sight of these men transforms anxiety into resolve. The war is no longer distant. It's here, embodied in these volunteers. Their destination, Washington, now isolated and threatened. To reach it, they must pass through Baltimore, a city simmering with secessionist anger. The jubilant parade in New York is only a prelude. Ahead lies danger and the first bloodshed of the Civil War. The 6th Massachusetts marches south, unaware of what awaits. The nation's fate marches with them. The 6th Massachusetts arrival in New York electrifies the city. Ordinary men, now soldiers, inspire unity and resolve. Flags wave, crowds cheer, and the city pledges itself to the Union. Beneath the celebration, anxiety lingers. Washington is vulnerable, the rail lines threatened. The newspapers capture the spectacle. The American flag is everywhere. The North's resolve is awakened, but the true test lies ahead. The march through New York is a parade through Baltimore. It will be a battle. The 6th Massachusetts, hailed as heroes, must soon prove themselves as soldiers. The nation holds its breath, waiting to see if they will reach the Capitol in time. The fate of the Union hangs in the balance. Washington, D.C. on April 19, 1861, was gripped by a palpable sense of panic and uncertainty. The very air seemed thick with apprehension. News of the Baltimore riot had just arrived, sending shockwaves through the Capitol. The 6th Massachusetts Infantry, en route to defend the city and the Union itself, was brutally attacked by a secessionist mob fueled by anti-government sentiment. Shots rang out in the streets of Baltimore, shattering the fragile peace. Blood stained the cobblestones. 4 soldiers and 12 civilians lay dead, victims of the escalating conflict. The first blood of the war, a war many hoped to avoid, was shed not on a distant battlefield, but in the heart of an American city, a stark reminder of the divisions tearing the nation apart. The Capitol was now effectively isolated from the rest of the Union. Telegraph lines were deliberately cut, and vital railroad tracks were blocked, hindering the arrival of much-needed supplies and reinforcements. President Lincoln paced the floors of the White House, his brow furrowed with worry. How could reinforcements possibly reach him in time to secure the city and the government? Across the Potomac River, the flickering campfires of the Virginia militia served as a constant, menacing reminder of the Confederate forces massing just a stone's throw away, dangerously close to the vulnerable Capitol. Hastily, public buildings were fortified with whatever materials could be found. Government clerks, more accustomed to pens than pistols, armed themselves, ready to defend their city against a potential siege. Secessionists grew bolder in their pronouncements, while Unionists eyed their neighbors with increasing suspicion, unsure of who could be trusted in this climate of fear and division. And families, fearing the worst, frantically prepared to flee the city, packing their belongings and abandoning their homes in search of safety. The dream of a quick and bloodless end to the rebellion, a hope clung to by many, vanished in a single terrifying day. The bodies of the fallen Massachusetts soldiers lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda, grim and solemn awakening to the brutal reality of the war that was now upon them. Lincoln felt the crushing weight of their deaths, a burden he would carry throughout the war. The city was a tinderbox, and the spark struck in Baltimore threatened to ignite the entire nation. While Washington trembled, hope stirred in New York. The 7th New York militiastic brokers, lawyers, artists marched down Broadway, cheered by thousands. Known as the Silk Stocking Regiment, they left comfort behind, bound for war. With Baltimore blocked, Colonel Lefferts led them by sea. Destination secret. On board, nerves mixed with resolve. They were the vanguard, the North's answer to crisis. Their departure united New York, melting divisions in a surge of patriotism. As the Boston steamed south, the men left behind certainty for the unknown, carrying the hopes of a nation. Every hour at sea left Washington vulnerable. The fate of the Capitol and the Union rested on their arrival. The next day, Washington's isolation deepened. Baltimore's mayor ordered key railroad bridges burned, severing the last rail links north. Lincoln, desperate, met with Baltimore officials who pleaded for no more troops. He refused. The Capitol could not be held hostage. Federal marshals seized telegraph offices across the North, searching for evidence of conspiracy. Suspected traitors were arrested without trial, habeas corpus quietly set aside. The government fought not just Southern armies, but hidden enemies within. South of Washington, disaster struck at the Gosport Navy Yard in Norfolk, Virginia. With Virginia on the brink of secession, Union forces faced a terrible choice: defend the yard or destroy it. Under orders, they set fire to ships and supplies, hoping to deny them to the Confederacy. Flames lit the night sky. Warships and ship houses became infernos. The destruction was incomplete. Confederates salvaged the USS Merrimack, later transforming it into the ironclad CSS Virginia. Cannons were recovered, their spikes drilled out. The Union's attempt to cripple the South's Navy backfired. Instead, they handed the Confederacy the tools for a naval revolution. The burning of Gosport cemented Virginia's commitment to the Confederate cause. The war's technological race had begun. In Richmond, the Virginia Military Institute cadets arrived, a fresh wave of young men ready to serve the Confederacy. They were led by the stern Professor Thomas Jackson, a man of unwavering conviction, soon to be known throughout the South as Stonewall. His leadership would prove invaluable. Their primary mission was clear: to drill the flood of eager but untrained volunteers into a disciplined, effective fighting force, a real army capable of defending the Confederacy. Richmond was rapidly transformed, becoming an armed camp buzzing with activity. Church bells no longer signaled solely prayer, but called men to war, to defend their homes and way of life. Patriotic women sewed flags, each stitch a testament to their devotion, and the city pulsed with a singular, unwavering purpose: secession and independence. The VMI cadets brought much-needed discipline and seriousness to the burgeoning war effort, forming the very nucleus of what would become the legendary Army of Northern Virginia. Meanwhile, far to the north in New York, over 100,000 citizens gathered in Union Square, a massive display of support, pledging both men and money to preserve the Union. The attack on Fort Sumter and the bloodshed of the Baltimore riot had effectively ended all debate. Both sides, now fully committed to war, gathered their strength, resources, and manpower for the coming collision. The entire nation was rapidly transitioning to a war footing, bracing for a conflict unlike any it had ever seen. Union General Benjamin Butler took bold action. With Baltimore blocked, he sailed his Massachusetts regiments to Annapolis, Maryland. Governor Hicks pleaded with Butler not to land, fearing Maryland would turn Confederate. Butler was unmoved. His mission was to save Washington. He landed his troops, seized the Naval Academy, and found a broken locomotive and damaged tracks. His men, skilled mechanics, repaired the line, creating a new supply route to the capital. Butler's audacity outflanked the secessionists and reopened Washington's lifeline. His actions were controversial, but critical. The capital's survival depended on such resolve. The Union's fortunes began to turn. The war reached the doorstep of Arlington House, home of Marianna Custis Lee and her husband, Colonel Robert E. Lee. Federal troops occupied the estate, its strategic heights too valuable to risk. The mansion, once a symbol of American history, became a Union headquarters. Mary Lee fled, leaving behind her cherished home. The South saw the seizure as a personal attack, fueling anger and resolve. For Lincoln, Union campfires on Arlington's heights brought relief, but also sorrow. In Richmond, Robert E. Lee accepted command of Virginia's forces. He spoke with emotion, pledging to defend his native state alone. Lee's decision was a blow to the North. Lincoln had hoped to give him command of all Union armies. Now, the South had its greatest soldier. Lee's choice gave the Confederacy legitimacy and confidence. His presence transformed militias into a real army. For the Union, it meant facing a formidable opponent. The war would be long and bloody. The path to reunion would go through Lee. His decision was both personal and strategic, a turning point. The stakes had never been higher. As Lee reluctantly took command of Virginia's forces, a pivotal moment unfolded, setting the stage for a conflict that would test the very fabric of the nation. Other officers, faced with agonizing choices, grappled with their allegiances, torn between loyalty to their states and their commitment to the Union. In Georgia, Joseph Wheeler, a West Point graduate, made the difficult decision to resign from the U.S. Army, swayed by the call of his home state. He was joining the Confederacy, one of many who made the painful split from old comrades, forever altering the course of their lives and careers. The officer corps fractured along these fault lines, severing friendships forged in shared experiences and common purpose. And the U.S. Army, once a symbol of national unity, was tragically torn apart by the irreconcilable differences. The Confederacy gained experienced and capable leaders, a crucial early advantage that would shape the initial battles of the war. Meanwhile, much-needed Union reinforcements, including Butler's troops and the New York 7th Regiment, finally arrived in Washington, D.C. This influx of soldiers effectively broke the Confederate siege, relieving the pressure on the capital. The city erupted in relief and jubilation. The arrival of fresh troops was a welcome sight. From the White House, Lincoln watched with a sense of profound relief and joy as the reinforcements marched in, bolstering the city's defenses. April 24, 1861. The USS Niagara loomed off Charleston Harbor, a steel-gray shadow in the dawn. Its orders, straight from President Lincoln, were clear: begin the blockade. The men aboard watched the distant outline of Fort Sumter, where war had erupted just days before. Captain William W. McKean, a veteran of the sea, knew this was no ordinary patrol. His mission: stop all ships from entering or leaving Charleston, striking at the South's lifeline, trade. The blockade was the first move in Lincoln's Anaconda Plan, aiming to choke the Confederacy's economy. Every ship turned away was a small Union victory. On shore, Charlestonians watched the Niagara with a mix of defiance and dread. The warship was a constant reminder the conflict was just beginning. For the sailors, the work was monotonous but vital, scanning the horizon, enforcing the blockade. They were the vanguard of a strategy that would soon involve hundreds of ships. The Niagara's silent patrol marked the start of a long, bitter struggle at sea. The blockade was more than a line on a map. It was a test of endurance and resolve. As the sun rose, the Niagara remained, a lonely sentinel signaling a new kind of war. The fate of the South's commerce, and perhaps the war itself, now rested on the Union Navy's watch. The blockade had begun. April 26, news spread Fort Smith, Arkansas had fallen to the Confederacy. The fort, a gateway to the west, was a symbol of federal authority, now lost. Captain William Sturgis, outnumbered and isolated, chose evacuation over futile resistance. Union troops retreated north, leaving the fort and its supplies to Arkansas state forces. The Confederate flag rose over Fort Smith, a major victory for the South. The loss opened the door for Confederate alliances with Native American tribes in Indian Territory. The Union's retreat left tribal leaders weighing their options, their future uncertain. The fall of Fort Smith was more than a military setback. It shifted the balance of power on the western frontier. The Confederacy gained a strategic base and new opportunities for support. For the Union, it was a sobering sign. The war was spreading, and control of the West was slipping away. The frontier, once a distant concern, was now a battleground. The Civil War's reach was growing. In Washington, Lincoln moved fast. On April 27, he expanded the blockade to Virginia and North Carolina. These states, rich in resources and industry, were vital to the Confederacy. Virginia's secession was a blow. Richmond would soon be the Confederate capital. The blockade now stretched for thousands of miles, an enormous challenge for the small Union Navy. Navy Secretary Gideon Welles launched a shipbuilding frenzy, converting steamers and ferries into warships. The blockade was a bold gamble, aiming to strangle the South's economy without a full-scale invasion. For Union sailors, the mission meant endless patrols and lonely watches. The blockade was slow, grinding work, but essential. Lincoln's strategy was clear: isolate the South, cut off its lifelines, and force surrender. The Union's industrial might was now a weapon at sea. The war was expanding on land and water. April 27. Thomas Jackson arrived at Harper's Ferry, a quiet professor, not yet Stonewall. The town, seized by Virginia militia, was chaos, volunteers everywhere, discipline nowhere. Jackson's task: forge an army from farmers and shopkeepers. He drilled the men relentlessly, demanding order and obedience. Harper's Ferry's armory, partially saved from destruction, became the heart of his efforts. Jackson called for reinforcements from the Shenandoah Valley. Volunteers poured in, swelling his ranks. Under Jackson's stern leadership, raw recruits became soldiers. He was building the force that would become the legendary Stonewall Brigade. Harper's Ferry was now a Southern stronghold, ready for the battles ahead. Jackson's legend was just beginning. The Confederacy had found a formidable leader. In Montgomery, Confederate President Jefferson Davis called Congress to a special session on April 29. The mood was triumphant. Fort Sumter had fallen, and the South felt invincible. Davis's message: defend secession, rally the South, and prepare for war. He urged Congress to recognize a state of war and grant him authority to raise an army and issue letters of marque. Privateers would strike at Union shipping, countering the blockade. The delegates, fired by Davis's words, moved quickly to build a government and army. The machinery of the Confederacy was grinding into motion. The South was readying for a long fight. April 29. In Frederick, Maryland's legislature faced a momentous choice. The state was deeply divided. Southern sympathies clashed with Northern ties. If Maryland seceded, Washington, D.C. would be surrounded. Lincoln acted decisively, suspending habeas corpus and arresting suspected secessionists. Governor Thomas Hicks tried to keep the peace, but neutrality was impossible. The legislature debated fiercely, secession or union. In the end, Unionists prevailed. Maryland voted against secession. They condemned the war but refused to leave the Union. It was a compromise, reflecting the state's divided loyalties. For Lincoln, it was a crucial victory. Washington was safe. For now, Maryland would remain a tense border state, but the Union held. The Confederacy's hopes for surrounding the capital were dashed. The war's fate hung on such decisions. April 29. The Confederate Congress convened in Montgomery, charged with building a nation at war. Delegates quickly recognized a state of war and authorized Davis to raise a 100,000-man army. Privateers were approved to attack Northern shipping. The Congress debated the location of the permanent capital. Richmond, Virginia, soon emerged as the choice. Moving the capital closer to the front was a bold, defiant move. The Congress adopted the Stars and Bars flag, printed money, and created a postal service. They worked urgently, knowing every day mattered. The foundations of the Confederacy were being laid in Montgomery. Their decisions would shape the war's course. The South was now a nation, on paper and in arms. Lincoln realized the war would be long. His first call for 75,000 men was not enough. On May 3, he called for 42,000 more volunteers for 3 years, not 90 days. He also expanded the regular Army and Navy, acting without Congress. The North responded with a surge of patriotism. Men rushed to enlist. Recruiting offices overflowed. Rallies filled town squares. The Union was mobilizing its true strength: industry, manpower, resolve. The small pre-war army was transforming into a massive citizen force. Lincoln's bold move signaled a fight to the finish. The boys in blue were preparing to march south. The war was about to begin in earnest. The nation braced for the struggle ahead. Secession's momentum surged. On May 6, Arkansas voted overwhelmingly to leave the Union. Only Isaac Murphy dissented, a lonely voice for the Union. The Confederacy gained a new state, new soldiers, and a western frontier. Arkansas' secession deepened the nation's fracture. The next day, Tennessee's governor forged a military alliance with the Confederacy. The state's resources and railroads now served the Southern cause. Tennessee's formal secession would follow, but the decision was made. The Confederacy now stretched from the Atlantic to the Mississippi. The Union's losses were mounting. The nation was truly and tragically divided. On May 9, 1861, a heavy silence settled over the vast, sun-scorched plains of Texas. It was a day of profound surrender, a quiet transfer of power that felt less like a negotiation and more like a betrayal. The United States Army was officially relinquishing control of its military posts, its cannons, its forts, and all its public property to the seceded state. This was not the result of a climactic battle, but the quiet, bureaucratic finalization of a decision made months earlier by one-man General David Twiggs. Twiggs, a career soldier with a long and storied past, had seen the storm clouds gathering and had chosen his side. He was a Georgian by birth, and his loyalties lay with the South, not with the Union he had sworn an oath to defend for decades. The very next day, May 10th, the political air in Maryland was thick with tension and uncertainty. The state was a powder keg, geographically and ideologically trapped between the North and the South. In the state capital of Annapolis, the Maryland General Assembly convened for a momentous vote. The question before them was not secession itself that was deemed too explosive a step to take directly. Instead, they passed a resolution, a carefully worded declaration that sought to walk a tightrope over a chasm. The resolution officially stated that Maryland would not secede, but it also proclaimed that the state would take no part in prosecuting the war against its Southern brethren. As Maryland politicians sought peace, the city of St. Louis, Missouri, another border state powder keg, erupted in violence. Also on May 10th, an event known as the Camp Jackson Affair unfolded. The state's pro-secessionist governor, Claiborne Fox Jackson, had ordered the Missouri Volunteer Militia to muster for what was ostensibly a routine training drill. Watching these developments with growing alarm was Captain Nathaniel Lyon, the fiery, red-bearded, and fiercely pro-Union commander of the arsenal. Lyon's force surrounded Camp Jackson, compelling the surprised and outgunned state militiamen to surrender without a fight. The real tragedy began as Lyon marched his prisoners through the streets of St. Louis. Taunts and insults escalated to throwing rocks and bricks. Then a shot rang out from the crowd. The nervous, inexperienced Union soldiers responded with a volley of fire. When the smoke cleared, at least 28 people lay dead or dying in the streets. On May 11th, the Union war effort received a new and many hoped transformative leader. George B. McClellan was appointed a major general in the regular army. At just 34 years old, McClellan was the embodiment of hope for a northern public desperate for a hero. His pre-war career was stellar. He had graduated second in his class at West Point, served with distinction in the Mexican-American War, and had been a military observer in the Crimean War. He was seen as the young Napoleon, a man who could forge the raw Union volunteers into a professional fighting force. The fragile neutrality of Maryland was shattered on the night of May 13th under a cloak of darkness and a driving thunderstorm. Union General Benjamin Butler decided he had waited long enough for the federal government to secure Baltimore. Under the crash of thunder and flashes of lightning, his troops marched silently through the wet streets to Federal Hill. By morning, the citizens of Baltimore awoke to a shocking sight. Union cannons were positioned on the hill, aimed directly at their homes and businesses. On May 13th, the very same day Butler occupied Baltimore, Queen Victoria of Great Britain issued a formal proclamation of neutrality. This was a document of immense international significance, treating both the United States and the newly formed Confederate States as belligerents with equal rights. The British decision was driven by economic and strategic considerations. The powerful British textile industry was heavily dependent on Southern cotton, and there was a faction within the British aristocracy that felt affinity for the planter class of the South. On May 14th, a man who would become one of the war's most iconic figures reluctantly accepted a commission as a colonel of the 13th U.S. Infantry. That man was William Tecumseh Sherman. His re-entry into the Army was not a moment of celebrated triumph, but one of deep personal anxiety. Sherman had witnessed the fever of secession firsthand while serving as superintendent of a military academy in Louisiana. When Louisiana seceded, he resigned, famously warning, "You people of the South don't know what you are doing. This country will be drenched in blood." On May 16th, the Confederate Congress passed crucial legislation. It authorized offering a bounty, a cash payment, to any man who enlisted in the Confederate Army for the duration of the war. This reflected a shift from patriotic fervor to the practical necessity of building a sustainable army. The bounty was a powerful tool, offering a significant sum for a poor farmer or laborer as an upfront reward for committing to the cause until victory was achieved. It was a pragmatic recognition that patriotism alone might not sustain an army through years of hardship. On May 20th, North Carolina, which had long resisted the pull of secession, finally made its move. Meeting in Raleigh, the delegates voted unanimously to sever their ties with the United States. The state's decision solidified the geographic integrity of the Confederacy. The very next day, May 21st, the Confederate Congress made an equally momentous decision. They voted to move the capital from Montgomery to Richmond, Virginia. This positioned the Confederate government just 100 miles from Washington, D.C. The selection of Richmond ensured that the narrow corridor between the two capitals would become the most contested and blood-soaked territory of the entire conflict. Great armies would maneuver, clash, and bleed across the fields and forests of northern Virginia for the next 4 years. The night was dark, the air heavy with anticipation along the Ohio River. Union soldiers from Ohio and Indiana waited, faces tense, rifles in hand. Across the water lay Virginia, the heart of the rebellion. Orders from General McClellan: cross the river, secure the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, protect loyal Unionists. Under faint starlight, the men moved, boarding ferries and flatboats, the water reflecting their determined faces. Farmers, clerks, and mechanics had become soldiers, marching into enemy territory. This was no drill. This was the first major incursion of the war. Disembarking on Virginia soil, the ground felt alien, the air hostile. They fanned out, securing the railroad bridge at Parkersburg and the suspension bridge at Wheeling, vital arteries of commerce. Locals watched from windows, some relieved, others resentful. The blue-coated soldiers were an occupying force, a sign the Union would not let Virginia go without a fight. The invasion had begun. For McClellan's men, this was a moment of profound significance. They were the vanguard. As dawn broke, the American flag was raised over the courthouse in Wheeling. It was a declaration the federal government was here to stay. The war had just become terrifyingly real. The Union's resolve was clear. The Confederacy had been challenged on its own soil. The first step across the line was complete. The nation's fate now hung in the balance. The soldiers braced for what was to come. The Civil War had truly begun. June 1st, pre-dawn quiet shattered in Fairfax Courthouse, Virginia. Lieutenant Tompkins and his cavalry rode in for reconnaissance, expecting little resistance. Instead, they found the Warrenton Rifles, local Virginians led by Captain John Quincy Marr. Alarm raised Yankees in town. Marr rushed to rally his men. Confusion reigned, shots fired from windows and fences. Marr tried to form a line calling out orders. Suddenly, a bullet struck him down. He became the first Confederate officer killed in combat. His men, stunned, turned to fury. The skirmish intensified. The Union cavalry, outnumbered, withdrew after losing a man. Marr's death sent shockwaves through the South. He was hailed as a martyr. His name became a rallying cry, proof of the North's aggression. In Fairfax's blood-stained square, the war's abstract principles became real. The first officer had fallen. The conflict was now personal. Both sides understood the stakes. The war's cost was no longer theoretical. The South mourned, the North pressed on. The first blood had been drawn. The war's brutality was just beginning. The nation's wounds would only deepen. The battle lines were set. June 1st, General Beauregard, hero of Fort Sumter, issued a fiery proclamation to Virginians, not a dry order, but a call to arms, designed to inflame and unite. He painted the Union as abolitionist invaders, bent on destroying the Southern way of life. A reckless tyrant has invaded your soil, he declared, warning of property seized and homes violated. His words stoked the South's deepest fears, leaving no room for neutrality. The proclamation spread through newspapers and pulpits, demanding total commitment. "To arms, Virginians! To arms!" he thundered. Beauregard cast the conflict as a holy war for survival, not just politics. Every man was urged to defend home, family, and honor. The message was clear: resistance was duty. The Union was painted as monstrous, the South as righteous defenders. The flames of secession burned hotter. Virginians rallied, their resolve hardened. The war's emotional stakes soared. Propaganda became a weapon as powerful as any cannon. The South prepared for total war. Beauregard's words echoed across the state. The lines between friend and foe were drawn in ink and blood. June 2nd, the war moved to the sea. The Union blockade tightened, but the southern coast was vast. In Charleston, the CSS Savannah, a converted pilot schooner, prepared to run the blockade. Captain Thomas Baker and his crew slipped out under darkness past Fort Sumter. The USS Minnesota patrolled nearby, but the Savannah was too small and swift to be seen. She reached the open Atlantic, her crew cheering they had run the blockade. The Savannah became the Confederacy's first privateer at sea. Their mission: capture Union merchant ships, disrupt Northern commerce. Each prize would be a blow to the Union. The crew felt triumphant, free, and ready to hunt. The Atlantic was now their battleground. The escape proved the blockade was porous. Hope surged in the South. The Union was put on notice. The war at sea had begun. The Savannah's daring run inspired others. The Confederacy's defiance was now afloat. June 3rd, the Savannah spotted her first target, a merchant brig, the Joseph, loaded with sugar. Captain Baker ordered battle stations, raised the Confederate flag, and fired a warning shot. The Joseph's captain, outgunned and stunned, surrendered. Confederate sailors boarded, taking the Union crew prisoner. The Savannah's first day at sea, and already a valuable prize. Spirits soared. The sugar was a sweet victory. A Confederate crew was placed aboard the Joseph, bound for a southern port. But triumph turned to tension. A Union warship, the USS Perry, appeared on the horizon. The hunter became the hunted. The odds shifted. The Savannah's fate hung in the balance. The chase was on. The Confederates braced for battle or capture. The war at sea was unforgiving. The Joseph's capture was brief glory. The Union was closing in. The privateer's daring would soon be tested. The Atlantic's dangers were just beginning. In the mountains of Western Virginia, June 2nd brought a different battle. Nearly 3,000 Union soldiers marched through rain and mud, converging on Philippi. 800 ill-prepared Confederates, led by Colonel Porterfield, were caught off guard. A local woman, Mrs. Humphreys, fired a warning pistol, triggering the Union attack early. Artillery thundered. The Confederate camp erupted in panic. Many fled in chaos, abandoning weapons and supplies. The Union infantry charged, bayonets fixed. The Confederates broke and ran. The Philippi races had begun. It was a rout, not a battle. Few casualties, but a decisive Union victory. The North celebrated, the South reeled. The first organized land battle ended in humiliation for the Confederacy. The war's momentum shifted. After Philippi, Confederate forces limped south, demoralized and leaderless. Porterfield was replaced by General Garnett, tasked with rebuilding. The Union's victory boosted morale and McClellan's reputation. Newspapers hailed the triumph. The North's confidence soared. Meanwhile, at sea, the Savannah was cornered by the USS Perry. Outgunned, Captain Baker surrendered. The first Confederate privateer was captured. The Joseph's prize crew was also taken. Confederate sailors faced trial as pirates, escalating tensions. The Confederacy's resolve hardened. The war was growing more bitter and personal. In the border states, Kentucky's struggle was pivotal. On June 8th, Kentucky declared neutrality, hoping to avoid the conflict. Governor Magoffin sympathized with the South, but the legislature was divided. Both Union and Confederacy respected the neutrality publicly. Lincoln treaded carefully, knowing Kentucky's loss could be disastrous. Unionists quietly organized. Confederates waited. The state became a tense, divided tinderbox. Kentucky's fragile peace could not last. The war's reach was inevitable. June 8th, Tennessee held a referendum: secession or union. West and Middle Tennessee voted overwhelmingly to secede. East Tennessee resisted fiercely. The state joined the Confederacy, becoming its 11th member. Celebrations erupted in some cities, defiance in others. East Tennessee's Unionists were ignored, fueling future resistance. Tennessee's secession gave the Confederacy vital resources and a buffer, but it also deepened internal divisions. The battle lines now ran through Tennessee's heart. The summer of 1861 began with a heat that felt like a premonition. War was no longer a distant threat, it was here. And with it came the boys, pouring into hastily assembled camps from every farm and town, full of fire and patriotism. But the glory of the uniform soon faded under the harsh realities of camp life. Sickness came swiftly: measles, typhoid, dysentery. These were enemies far more insidious than any rebel yell. The army was simply not prepared. The medical corps was a shadow, a handful of surgeons overwhelmed by the sheer scale of human need. The camps became breeding grounds for disease, places where a young man's dreams of battlefield valor could wither and die from a fever far from home. A desperate cry for help went out, not from the generals, but from the ranks. From Galesburg, Illinois, a voice answered. She had listened to the letters read aloud in her church letters from the boys of the 22nd Illinois Infantry stationed in Cairo. Her name was Mary Ann Bickerdike. She was a widow in her 40s, a botanic physician, a force of nature. They spoke of spoiled food, of filth, of fevers that burned through the night with no one to offer a cool cloth or a sip of clean water. The good people of Galesburg collected $500 worth of supplies, but they knew that sending supplies was not enough. They needed someone to ensure those provisions reached the men who needed them most. They needed Mother Bickerdike. When she arrived in Cairo, she found a scene of appalling neglect. The regimental hospital was a nightmare. Men lay on damp straw, their bodies racked with chills and covered in filth. The air was thick with the stench of sickness and despair. Bickerdike did not ask for permission. She did not wait for orders. She rolled up her sleeves and began to work. She scrubbed floors, bathed soldiers, and cooked nourishing broths in giant kettles. She fought with quartermasters for fresh supplies and defied surgeons who questioned her authority. To the boys, she was a savior, a mother who had come to rescue them from the brink. She brought order to the chaos. Down in Virginia, the war was about to have its first real taste of organized battle. The air on the peninsula between the York and James Rivers was thick with humidity and tension. Union forces under Major General Benjamin Butler occupied Fort Monroe. Butler was a political general, a man of bluster and ambition, but with little real military experience. He planned an advance against a smaller Confederate force. The Confederate commander was Colonel John B. Magruder Prince John. He was a stark contrast to Butler, a career Army officer, a veteran of the Mexican-American War, known for his theatrical flair and his cunning understanding of military deception. The target was a small church, Big Bethel Church, where Magruder had established an outpost. He knew his force of about 1,400 men was outnumbered, but he also knew the terrain and he knew how to use it. The Union plan was complex, involving a nighttime march and a coordinated, multi-pronged attack. It was a plan that required precision and discipline qualities these new soldiers had not yet learned. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 10th, two of Butler's columns mistook each other for the enemy. A volley of friendly fire erupted in the gloom. The shots shattered the silence and the element of surprise. The sound of the skirmish alerted Magruder's pickets. The Confederates were now fully aware that the Union Army was on the move. The elaborate plan for a surprise attack had dissolved into a clumsy, noisy advance. The Union force, numbering around 3,500 men, was under the direct field command of Brigadier General Ebenezer Pierce. Despite the initial chaos, he pressed the attack. The men were green, but they were eager to prove their mettle. The 5th New York Zouaves, with their flamboyant red trousers and fezzes, were sent forward. They were a colorful target against the green Virginia landscape, advancing straight into the teeth of the Confederate defenses. Magruder's men held their fire, waiting with disciplined patience as the Zouaves came closer. The order was given. A thunderous volley erupted from the earthworks. The Confederate artillery opened up, sending shells screaming into the Union ranks. The Zouaves were staggered. Their lines, so crisp and perfect on the parade ground, dissolved into a chaotic mass of running, falling men. Again and again, the Union troops tried to press the attack. Pierce sent regiments forward in piecemeal assaults, one after another, against the well-entrenched Confederate position. Each charge met the same fate, a devastating wall of lead and iron. The creek and the surrounding marshland channeled the Union attacks into kill zones, where Magruder's men could fire with deadly accuracy. The noise was deafening, a constant roar of musketry and cannon fire, punctuated by the screams of the wounded. Among the Union casualties was a young captain from the 5th New York. His name was Judson Kilpatrick. He was ambitious, daring, and destined for controversial fame. But on this day, at Big Bethel, he was just another young officer leading his men into the storm. As he rallied his company for another desperate charge, a piece of a Confederate shell tore through his thigh. The wound was grievous, a searing flash of pain that sent him tumbling to the ground. His men saw him fall. The sight of their bold captain struck down sent a fresh wave of despair through the already shaken ranks. His wounding was more than just a personal injury, it was a symbol of the Union's failure. After several hours of pointless carnage, the Union commanders finally accepted the inevitable. The order was given to retreat. Men straggled back, carrying their wounded, their bright uniforms now torn and stained with dirt and blood. Magruder's men let out a triumphant cheer, the first rebel yell many of the Union soldiers would ever hear. The Confederates had won a clear victory. They had lost only 1 man killed and 7 wounded. The Union forces suffered 18 killed, 53 wounded, and 5 missing. It was not a large battle by the standards that would come later, but its impact was enormous, a profound humiliation for the North and a massive boost to Southern morale. While blood was being spilled in the East, a different kind of battle was being waged in the mountains of Western Virginia. Here, the land and the people were different. The economy was not built on large plantations and slave labor. It was built on small farms, coal mining, and commerce that flowed not east to Richmond, but north and west toward the Ohio River. The people of these mountains felt a stronger kinship with Pennsylvania and Ohio than with the slave-holding aristocracy that dominated Virginia's state government. For years, they had felt ignored and underrepresented by the politicians in Richmond. When Virginia voted to secede from the Union, the people of the West saw their moment. They would not be dragged out of the United States. On June 11, 1861, the Second Wheeling Convention convened. Delegates from the fiercely pro-Union counties of Western Virginia gathered, their purpose clear and audacious, to defy the government in Richmond and create a new government loyal to the United States. This was not just a political disagreement, it was an act of rebellion against their own state. The atmosphere in Wheeling was charged with a revolutionary spirit. Men spoke of liberty and loyalty, their words echoing the sentiments of the nation's founding fathers. On June 13th, the convention adopted a Declaration of the Rights of the People of Virginia. It was a powerful document declaring that the secession ordinance passed by the Richmond government was illegal and void. Day by day, the pieces of a new government were put into place. The delegates were systematically dismantling the authority of the existing state government and building a new one in its place. This was a bold and legally questionable move, but it was driven by a powerful conviction. On June 19th, the convention took its most decisive step. It passed an ordinance to create the restored government of Virginia. The next day, the delegates elected Francis H. Pierpont as the governor of this new, loyalist Virginia. In just over a week, they had done the unthinkable, created a government in exile within their own state's borders. From their perch in Wheeling, these mountain Unionists had defied Richmond and cast their lot with Abraham Lincoln. A state was being born from the ashes of rebellion. As the nation braced for a long and bloody war, a different kind of army was being organized. The shocking reports of filth and disease in the army camps, combined with the medical chaos seen after Big Bethel, created a public outcry. Women's aid societies had sprung up in towns and cities across the North, collecting supplies and sending comforts to the soldiers, but their efforts were disorganized, a patchwork of goodwill without central direction. On June 9th, a group of prominent civilians, including doctors, clergymen, and social reformers, met with President Lincoln. They proposed the creation of a private civilian organization that would work alongside the Army's medical corps. Lincoln was initially skeptical. He feared the creation of a fifth wheel to the coach, another layer of bureaucracy that would get in the way, but he was persuaded by the urgency of the situation. On June 13, 1861, President Lincoln signed the order creating the United States Sanitary Commission. Its purpose was clear and vital: to investigate the sanitary condition of the Union troops and coordinate civilian relief efforts. Its leaders, like the Reverend Henry W. Bellows and the landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, were men of immense energy and organizational genius. They immediately set to work establishing a network of local branches across the North. The Sanitary Commission quickly became the great channel of Northern benevolence. They sent inspectors to Army camps to report on conditions and demand improvements. They published pamphlets on everything from camp layout to personal hygiene. They operated hospital ships, soldiers' homes, and ambulance services. Most importantly, they organized the thousands of local aid societies into a powerful national network, collecting and distributing vast quantities of food, clothing, and medical supplies. The Sanitary Commission was a testament to the power of organized citizen action, a force for life in a time of death. It revolutionized military medicine and saved countless lives through the war. While the Unionists in Wheeling were building a new government, the established governor in Richmond, John Letcher, was trying to hold his state together. He faced a monumental task. The secession of Virginia had been a deeply divisive act. Letcher was a moderate by secessionist standards, a man who had initially opposed leaving the Union, but once the decision was made, he committed himself fully to the Confederacy. On June 14, 1861, he issued a proclamation aimed at the people of the rebellious West. His appeal was a mixture of paternal pleading and stern warning. He reminded the Westerners of their shared history and heritage as Virginians. He spoke of the tyranny of the Lincoln administration and the threat of federal invasion. He portrayed the Union soldiers gathering on their borders not as liberators but as foreign aggressors. He called upon their sense of state loyalty, urging them to reject the usurpers at Wheeling and to rally to the banner of Virginia and the Confederacy. He promised them protection and celebrated their shared identity as Southerners. But Letcher's words largely fell on deaf ears in the mountains. The economic and cultural ties that bound the West to the North were simply stronger than the political ties that bound them to the East. Letcher's proclamations were backed by the threat of force. He called for militia companies to be raised in the western counties and dispatched Confederate forces under General Robert S. Garnett to secure the region. The governor's plea had failed to win their hearts and minds, so now he would try to compel their obedience through military power. The stage was set for a civil war within a Civil War neighbor, pitted against neighbor in the mountains and valleys of western Virginia. The struggle for the border states was a critical battle in the early months of the war, and nowhere was it more intense than in Missouri. The state was deeply divided, with a pro-secessionist governor, Claiborne Fox Jackson, and a fiercely pro-unionist population. The man at the center of the Union effort was Captain Nathaniel Lyon. He was a fiery, uncompromising abolitionist, a regular Army officer who saw the conflict in stark moral terms. He did not believe in compromise. He believed in crushing the rebellion with overwhelming force. In May, he had captured the pro-Confederate state militia at Camp Jackson in St. Louis, an act that secured the city but ignited violence across the state. By June, Governor Jackson and the pro-Confederate leaders had fled St. Louis. They retreated to the state capital, Jefferson City, a sleepy town on the Missouri River. There, they hoped to rally support and officially align Missouri with the Confederacy. But Lyon was not about to let that happen. On June 13th, he loaded about 2,000 Union volunteers onto steamboats and chugged up the Missouri River from St. Louis. His objective was simple: to seize the capital, disperse the secessionist government, and secure Missouri for the Union once and for all. There was no subtlety in his plan. It was a direct military occupation of the state's seat of government. When Lyon's flotilla approached Jefferson City on June 15th, there was no battle. Governor Jackson and his supporters, including the future Confederate General Sterling Price, had learned of Lyon's advance. They knew their small, poorly organized force was no match for Lyon's troops. They made a hasty decision to abandon the capital. They packed up the state's seal and whatever records they could carry and fled further west. When Lyon's men disembarked, they found a city that was eerily quiet. The governor's mansion was empty. The state house was deserted. The Confederate resistance had melted away without firing a shot. Lyon's handling of the situation was firm and decisive. He raised the stars and stripes over the Capitol, building a powerful symbol of federal authority. He declared martial law to maintain order, but he treated the local population with a measured hand. He issued a proclamation assuring the citizens that he was there to protect their rights and uphold the law, not to persecute them. There was no organized Confederate force to fight, but Lyon knew the enemy was still out there scattered but not yet broken. By claiming Jefferson City, Lyon had cut the head off the secessionist movement in Missouri, but the fight for the state was far from over. The bloodless capture of Jefferson City was a crucial victory for the Union, securing Missouri's capital and dealing a devastating blow to Confederate hopes in the border states. The war for Missouri would continue, but Lyon had struck the decisive first blow. June 17, 1861. The morning mist clings to the Virginia countryside near the small town of Vienna, just 20 miles from the Union capital. What begins as a routine reconnaissance mission will end in blood and Confederate victory. A single locomotive carries Company B of the 1st Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment along the Alexandria, Loudoun, and Hampshire Railroad. Their mission: probe Confederate positions and test enemy strength. 75 Union soldiers under the command of Captain Daniel Tyler sit tensely in the swaying car. These are green troops, volunteers who enlisted with dreams of glory, now facing their first taste of Confederate steel. But Confederate Colonel Maxcy Gregg's South Carolina Regiment lies in wait. Hidden among the oak and pine trees, 250 Confederate soldiers have turned this quiet stretch of railroad into a killing ground. Colonel Gregg, a Harvard-educated lawyer turned warrior, has positioned his men with military precision. Every rifle is trained on the approaching locomotive. As the Union train slows near Vienna Station, Captain Tyler orders his men to disembark for reconnaissance. They step into Gregg's carefully laid trap. The moment the blue-coated soldiers touch Virginia soil, Colonel Gregg gives the signal. The morning air erupts with the thunder of musket fire. The first volley cuts down 3 Union soldiers instantly. Private William Wilder of Zanesville, Ohio, falls with a Confederate bullet through his heart. He will never see his 19th birthday. Private George Howe and Private Henry Carr join Wilder in death as Confederate lead finds its mark. 4 more Union soldiers writhe in agony from their wounds. Captain Tyler, realizing his men are outnumbered more than 3 to 1, orders an immediate retreat. The surviving Union soldiers scramble back to their locomotive as Confederate bullets whistle overhead. The locomotive's whistle screams as the engineer throws the throttle forward. Black smoke billows from the stack as the Union survivors flee back toward Alexandria, leaving their dead behind on Virginia soil. That same morning, 400 miles west, another battle shapes the war's destiny. The Missouri River town of Boonville sits at the heart of a struggle that will determine whether Missouri remains in the Union or joins the Confederacy. Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson has called out the Missouri State Guard, hoping to align his state with the Confederate cause. But Captain Nathaniel Lyon of the United States Army has other plans. Nathaniel Lyon, a Connecticut-born West Point graduate with fire in his eyes and steel in his spine, leads 1,700 Union troops toward Boonville. This red-bearded warrior has already seized the St. Louis Arsenal and now moves to crush Missouri's Confederate sympathizers. Lyon rides at the head of his column, his uniform dusty from the march, his eyes fixed on Boonville's church spires rising above the Missouri River bluffs. He knows that controlling this river town means controlling Missouri itself. Opposing Lyon stands Brigadier General John Sappington Marmaduke of the Missouri State Guard. The 28-year-old Marmaduke, son of a former Missouri governor, commands roughly 800 men, but these are militia, not seasoned soldiers. Marmaduke's men are farmers and shopkeepers, fathers and sons who answered their governor's call. They carry hunting rifles, shotguns, and whatever weapons they could find. Brave hearts, but no match for Lyon's disciplined regulars. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Lyon's artillery opens fire. The boom of cannon echoes across the Missouri River as Union shells crash into the State Guard positions. The Battle of Boonville has begun. Lyon's professional gunners find their range quickly. Shell after shell screams over the Missouri countryside, exploding among Marmaduke's hastily constructed earthworks. The Missouri militia breaks almost immediately. Faced with professional soldiers and artillery, Marmaduke's men scatter like leaves before a storm. Some flee toward the river, others into the surrounding countryside. By noon, the Stars and Stripes flies over Boonville. Lyon's swift victory costs him virtually nothing, perhaps a dozen wounded, no dead. Marmaduke loses twice that number, but more importantly, he loses Missouri. As smoke clears from these June 17th battles, the Confederate War Department in Richmond makes a decision that will echo through history. Colonel Thomas Jonathan Jackson of the Virginia Military Institute receives promotion to Brigadier General. The 37-year-old former mathematics professor has impressed his superiors with his discipline and tactical mind. Soon, the world will know him by another name, Stonewall Jackson. The Confederate general who stands like a stone wall against Union advances. That same day in Illinois, another future legend receives his promotion, Ulysses S. Grant, the West Point graduate who resigned from the Army in disgrace 7 years earlier, now wears the eagles of a Union colonel. Grant takes command of the 21st Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment, unruly volunteers who have driven away their previous commanders. None suspect that this quiet, unassuming man will become the Union's greatest general and the 18th President of the United States. On this single day, June 17, 1861, two men receive promotions that will shape America's destiny. Jackson will become Lee's most trusted lieutenant, the tactical genius of the Confederacy. Grant will rise to command all Union armies and accept Lee's surrender at Appomattox. 10 days later, June 27th, the Union capital transforms into an armed camp. Nearly 40,000 soldiers now guard Washington, D.C., more troops than have ever been assembled on American soil. From Georgetown to Alexandria, white canvas tents stretch to the horizon. Volunteer regiments from Maine to California have answered Lincoln's call, transforming the sleepy capital into a fortress bristling with bayonets. July 1st brings news of Union naval supremacy. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles reports a fleet of over 80 warships manned by 13,000 sailors and Marines. The Union's wooden walls will strangle Confederate commerce and support amphibious operations along the southern coast. These ships will enforce Lincoln's naval blockade, the Anaconda Plan, designed to squeeze the Confederacy into submission by cutting off its trade with Europe. July 2nd, 1861. President Abraham Lincoln makes one of the most controversial decisions of his presidency. With the stroke of his pen, he suspends the writ of habeas corpus, the ancient right that protects citizens from unlawful imprisonment. This extraordinary measure allows military authorities to arrest and hold suspected Confederate sympathizers without trial. Lincoln justifies this constitutional suspension as necessary to preserve the Union itself, but critics call it tyranny. July 4, 1861, Independence Day. As America celebrates 85 years of freedom, President Lincoln addresses a special session of Congress with an unprecedented request. I recommend that you give the legal means for making this contest a short and decisive one, Lincoln declares. He asks Congress for 500,000 men and $400 million to crush the rebellion. Lincoln's current forces number 260,000 men, 165,000 volunteers who left farms and factories to preserve the Union, plus 95,000 regular Army and Navy personnel. But Lincoln knows this rebellion will require more than patriotic enthusiasm. It will demand the full might of American industrial power and the blood of American sons.